Hello and welcome to our instructional series of videos. In this installment, we're going to show you how to replace the battery in late 2013 through mid-2015 15-inch Retina MacBook Pros. This process involves the use of flammable substances and runs the risk of fire or personal injury if the battery you're removing gets damaged during removal. For your safety, be sure to both read all the information included with your kit and watch this video in its entirety before proceeding. For this installation, it's vital that we drain the battery until the computer shuts down to reduce risk of accidental ignition of the battery. We've already drained the battery, gathered our materials, and are working on a soft, static-free work surface. We're now ready to begin. The first thing to do is place the cloth that came with your kit over the keyboard of your MacBook Pro and close the lid to help protect your screen in case of any spillage of the adhesive remover. We can now remove the bottom cover. Start with the two pentalobe screws in the center of the hinge edge as they're smaller than the others. You can then remove the remaining 8 pentalobe screws. You should now be able to lift the bottom cover off and set it aside. Disconnect the battery by lifting up on its large central connector. Right next to the battery connector is the touchpad connector. Detach the cover by removing the 2 Torx T5 screws and lifting it away. Then, you can lift up on the connector itself to disconnect it. Peel back the edge of the label that covers the battery connector and remove the Torx T5 screw near the edge that holds the battery in place. Then, do the same on the other side. Next, remove the SSD by first removing the retaining screw, then sliding the drive out of its socket. Then, remove the I/O board cable covers by first removing the Torx T5 screws that hold them in place, then disconnect the cable itself by gently lifting up on the connectors until they come free. Lift the rubber cover off of the fan and fold it up out of the way. Next, detach the antenna cables from the wireless card by unsnapping them from their connectors. Then, remove the Torx T5 screw holding the card in place, then slide the card itself out of its socket. You can then slide the camera cable connector out of its socket and lift the entire bundle of cables up and off the fan and out from the cable guide on the other side. We can now remove the fan itself by first removing these 3 Torx T5 screws. Each screw is different, so keep track of which one goes where. Then, lift up the latch on the ZIF connector holding the fan cable in. You should now be able to lift up on the fan and gently unstick the cable from the logic board. The connector should slide right out of its socket. To detach the lower I/O board cable, first lift up on the locking handle on the connector, then slide it out of its socket. Next, remove the 2 Torx T5 screws holding the I/O board in place. You should now be able to lift the board up and out of the MacBook Pro. Next, lift the keyboard backlight cable connector from its socket. Then, do the same with the right speaker cable. Peel back the label covering the keyboard connector cable, then lift up the bar to open its ZIF connection and slide the cable free. Then you can disconnect the left speaker cable like you did the right one. Lift the rubber cover off of the fan and fold it up out of the way. Then, remove the 3 screws holding the fan in place. Again, each screw is different, so be sure to keep track of which goes where. Then, lift the latch on the fan cable's ZIF socket. Finally, like before, lift the fan out of the MacBook Pro, then peel the cable up from the logic board if necessary and remove it from its socket. Lift the latch on the display data cable and slide it out of its socket. Finally, lift the bar of the microphone's ZIF socket and slide the cable free. We can now remove the Torx T5 screws that hold the logic board in place. Start with this one near where the SSD used to be. Then, this one near the memory, then the 2 near the center of the hinge edge. Then a silver screw near the right heatsink, the corresponding one is on the other side, hidden underneath a rubber cover. Finally, remove the 2 holding the MagSafe connector in place. You should now be able to carefully lift the logic board out of the MacBook Pro. We can now remove the right speaker. Do this by removing the 3 screws that hold it in place, then lifting it up and out of the MacBook Pro. Do the same for the left speaker. Finally, lift the bar on the trackpad's cable ZIF connector, then peel back the label covering the cable near the battery connector and gently detach the cable from the battery itself. You should then be able to slide the cable from the ZIF connector we opened earlier. At this point, we're going to be working with adhesive remover, so be sure you're working in a well-ventilated area and use the protective glasses and gloves included in your kit. Using the syringe from the kit, apply about 1/4 of a milliliter of adhesive remover under one of the outer battery cells and let it sit for about a minute or so. Then, starting at a corner, work one of the plastic cards underneath the battery cell, slicing through the weakened adhesive strips until it comes free. You can use more adhesive remover if you need to, but try and use as little as possible. Once the first cell is free, move it out of the way and repeat the process on the second cell. Again, try to use as little adhesive remover as possible. Once both cells are loose, use one of the plastic cards to hold them up from the surface of the MacBook Pro so they don't accidentally re-adhere. You can now repeat the process with the two outer cells on the other side. For the center two cells, first slide a card down the center so that it starts to lift one of the cells. Then, let about 1/4 milliliter of adhesive remover drip down the card under the battery where it can sit for a minute. Use the card to slice at the adhesive under the battery. You can also use a second card to slice and lift from the other side, but you need to be careful that you're slicing under the battery itself and not under the trackpad that the battery sits on. Then, do the same for the other center cell. Once all the cells have been detached, you should be able to lift the whole battery unit up and out of the MacBook Pro. While it's optional, it's generally a good idea to remove the remaining adhesives so that the new battery has a clean surface to adhere to. To do this, simply use a little of the adhesive remover and use your nylon tool to scrape up the adhesive until you can peel it the rest of the way off. Once you're done, wipe up any extra adhesive remover and let the MacBook sit for about a half an hour to ensure everything has evaporated and dried. Now it's time to reassemble your MacBook Pro. Start by replacing the right speaker assembly. Simply slide it into place, then secure it with its 3 screws. The long full-threaded screw goes in the bottom hole, the long collared screw goes in the center hole, and the short screw goes in the top hole. Repeat the process for the left speaker. Taking care that no cables are trapped underneath, set the logic board back into place, making sure it sits flat within the MacBook Pro. Replace the 2 Torx T5 screws that hold the MagSafe connector in place. Then, replace the longer silver screw near the heatsink and set its rubber cap back on top. Then replace the other silver screw on the other side. The next 2 longest screws are the same length and go in the 2 holes along the hinge edge. The next longest screw goes in the hole near the memory. And finally, the smallest logic board screw goes in the hole under the SSD bay. We can now reattach a number of cables and boards. Start with the keyboard by sliding its cable back into the ZIF connector until it's fully seated. Then locking it into place with the lever on the back. Next is the left speaker. These connectors just line up vertically and snap into place. The microphone connector slides into its ZIF socket, which then locks to keep it secured. Then, slide the display data cable into its socket and latch it into place. Slide the left fan cable into its ZIF socket and latch it before laying the fan back into place. The fan is held by 3 different size Torx T5 screws. The centermost one is the short one with the wide head. The screw directly across from it has a collar on it, and the bottommost one is full-threaded. Next, let's reconnect the right speaker cable like we did the left. Then, straight up towards the hinge, snap the keyboard backlight cable into place. You can now set the I/O board into place, making sure that it lays flat without anything trapped underneath. Then, secure it with its 2 Torx T5 screws, which are both the same length. Attach the lower I/O cable by sliding it into its socket and using the handle to latch it into place. We can now replace the right fan in the same way as the left. Slide the fan cable into its ZIF socket and latch it down. Set the fan flat and replace the Torx T5 screws from top inside to the lower outer with the shortest large-headed screw, the collared screw, and the full-threaded screw. Next, slide the camera cable back into its socket and route all the cables along their guide along the I/O board. Next, align the wireless card with its socket, slide it into place, and secure it with a single screw. You can now attach the antenna cables by lining up their connectors and snapping them together. The cables should position themselves over the appropriate connectors. Then, align the SSD card with its socket, slide it into place, and secure it with its single screw. Attach the I/O ribbon cable to its connectors on the logic board and I/O board. Then, replace and secure the connector covers with their Torx T5 screws. Finally, flip down the 2 rubber covers back into place over the fans, and we're ready to install the battery itself. First, peel off the paper covering the adhesive on the back of the new battery. Then, set the battery into place. push on the battery board and insert one of the retaining screws part way to help align it. Then, do the same on the other side, only tightening the screw completely this time. You can then go back and tighten the first one all the way. Next, slide the trackpad cable into its ZIF connector near the bottom, and then latch the connector shut. Line up the connector on the other end with its socket on the logic board and snap the two together. You can then stick the cable to the new battery using any residual adhesive that may be left on it. Then, replace the trackpad's connector cover and secure it with the 2 Torx T5 screws. Finally, line up the battery connector with its socket and press it into place. We can now replace the bottom cover and screws. Start with the 2 center screws along the hinge edge as they're shorter than the others. Then, replace the remaining 8 screws. You can now open your MacBook Pro, remove the protective cloth, and charge and condition your battery according to guidelines.
First, shut your computer all the way down. Then, attach the power adapter. The light on the adapter should turn amber to show that the battery is charging. Once the battery is 100% charged, the light should turn green. Once it has, you should leave it connected for at least 2 more hours. However, you can use your computer during this time rather than leaving it off. After that, we'll need to discharge the battery. First, in the Energy Saver Preference pane, make sure all the sliders are set to the right and any power saving measures, like sleeping the hard drive, are turned off. Do this for both the power adapter and the battery settings. Once you've done that, disconnect the power cable and let the battery discharge completely until the computer shuts down. You can still use it at this time, but don't do anything particularly heavy. Steady and even usage will result in better power system calibration. Once the battery is discharged, your computer will automatically shut down. Leave it shut down for at least 5 hours to ensure the battery is completely drained. Finally, reattach the power cable and let the battery charge back up to 100%. This time, you can use the computer while it's charging. Once the battery is charged back up, the power management system is properly calibrated. You can now set your energy saver settings back to what they were before and use your computer normally.